Welcome back to Proxam, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about Craftworld Eldar Warlocks and Farseers, but not particularly about their special rules, but about the weapons they use, the Witchblade and, of course, the Singing Spear. Now, a lot of you, just like me, looked at the faction focus and kind of skimmed over the part where the Farseers' weapons and, the weapon profiles of Witchblade and Singing Spear were on full display. And I think this is in part because a lot of our mentality revolves around the fact that Farseers have typically been pretty garbage in combat. Yes, they have been able to wound on 2+ against most targets for a vast majority of Warhammer 40k history, but they have such a low amount of attacks that it's usually not even worth it, and the AP of the attacks is, usually close to 0. So unless you're going against a very lightly armed target, Farseer attacking anything might not do much of any kind of damage at all. This has been the situation for many editions. Farseers are generally just not good in combat. However, I do think that these weapon profiles have pretty big ramifications for some of the units in our army, including, of course, Warlocks and the notorious Warlock Conclaves, or Seer Councils, as we have loved to call them for many editions. So without further ado, let us go ahead and dive right into it. So what we're going to be looking at in this video is the Witchblade and Singing Spear from the Eldar reveal. We're kind of going to be doing an autopsy on those two weapon profiles and analyzing them. And we're going to be looking at what the new weapon stats mean for Warlocks and Farseers in 10th edition. So looking at the profiles here, I know it may be a little bit small to see, but the Singing Spear is still a shooting weapon. It has a range of 12, attacks 1. It hits on a 2+ on a Farseer. It'll probably be a 3+ on a Warlock. It has strength 9, AP 0, and damage 3. Now, the first thing that I noticed about this was that it was basically exactly the same as the profile of the Singing Spear now. And that's not really a good thing if you consider that the Throne Singing Spear in this edition is going against units that have a much lower toughness value in general. There's a lot more units that are going to be increased in toughness, including some infantry. Terminators are now toughness 5, which means that this thing will be wounding them on a 3+ instead of a 2+. Not that Singing Spears were that great against Terminators in the first place, but again, a lot of units in pretty much every codex are getting a slight toughness increase, including models like the Votann. So, Singing Spears wounding on 2+ versus 3+ against those formerly toughness 4 targets is kind of a big deal. The Singing Spear has also lost its ability to wound on 2+ in combat. If you look at the melee profile, it has attacks 2, still weapon skill 2+, just like always. Farseers have always been pretty garbage in combat, but it has strength 3, and it has no special rules that allow it to wound on 2+. Still has damage 3, but as you can see, it's lost its Witchblade ability completely, which is really a shame because Eldar Witchblades and Singing Spears have always been able to wound targets easier in every single edition. Now, whether or not you want to argue that this should still be in the game, wounding everything on 2+ is up for interpretation. Personally, I believe that if something has always been a staple of a certain unit or a characteristic of a certain weapon, that should stay in some form, right? And again, it doesn't need to be a 2+, maybe it could be a 3+ or even a 4+, something. But basically just not being able to wound anything on higher than a 5+ in the game. And again, strength 3, remember. So most targets are going to be wounding on a 5. Some targets are even going to be wounding on a 6 now with the Singing Spear. And I just want to let that sink into you guys because I don't know about you, but I've been playing since about the late 2nd edition, 3rd edition of the game, and Witchblades and Singing Spears have always been pretty good against most targets with a high toughness, right? They've gotten some sort of bonus. Mostly it's been always wound on a 2+, but that's now been lost. And this means that the Singing Spear is just not looking that hot. Now, the Witchblade, on the other hand, I had some hope that the Witchblade would still be kind of good. And, it did lose its AP, but it still has the same damage. It still has the same hit ratio and stuff like that, attacks, whatever. But instead of wounding 2+ against everything, it only has wounding on 2+ against infantry. Now, again, I would be okay with this because I can understand GW not wanting a unit that can be effective against every type of target out there. But I don't know about you guys. Singing Spears and Witchblades were never a great weapon for dealing with most vehicles, right? And even if you wanted to get rid of that and say that instead maybe Witchblades just got +1 to wound or Singing Spears got +1 to wound, I would be totally fine with that. You know, that wouldn't be so big of a deal to me. But to get rid of the rule completely is in my opinion, a little bit nonsense. Now, the other thing we notice about this profile that a lot of you might have missed on the first glance, and I did as well, was the psychic keyword on the weapon. Now, I've seen a couple of different psychic weapons in the reveal so far. A vast majority of them are better than the Witchblade and Singing Spear, just almost in every way. The damage is usually D3 or 2 or 3 or something like that, around that level, you know, I mean, in that ballpark. They usually have a couple of pips of AP, either 1 or 2, which is obviously more than the Witchblade and Singing Spear, and they're wielded by models with much more impressive combat stats. Which does make sense for those armies. I don't think a Farseer in any kind of world should be able to beat a Librarian in close combat, and a Librarian in general should be much better at fighting. However, the weapon itself shouldn't be so much better that the psychic keyword itself is being used as a way to balance the Witchblade and Singing Spear. Now, let me kind of go into why I believe that the psychic keyword is actually not that great. So far, we haven't seen anything that denotes a bonus from having a psychic weapon. So, psychic weapons don't ignore armor, psychic weapons don't confer extra damage, psychic weapons don't do extra damage against psychers. So what's the point of having a psychic weapon? Well, psychic weapons can be targeted with vulnerabilities. So there are certain abilities in the game, like for example, the Thousand Suns ability, that can make psychic weapons hazardous. So on top of having already a really just stanky profile as far as a melee weapon goes, both of these weapons are considered psychic and could be subject to a lot of special rules that target psychic weapons and attacks, which is extremely problematic. So what do the new weapon stats mean for Warlocks and Farseers in 10th edition? Well, obviously you're going to see a decreased combat effectiveness, and you're also going to see an increased weapon vulnerability. As far as their decreased combat effectiveness, both weapons have been severely nerfed however you want to look at it, right? Anti-infantry 2+ used to be 2+ against everything, right? That's a nerf as far as the Witchblade goes. The Witchblade also lost a pip of AP. It didn't have much before. That kind of made sense, but considering the weapon's so weak anyway, not by much. The Singing Spear probably saw the greatest nerf, because not only did its range attack not increase at all, but its melee profile is now garbage because it doesn't have the ability to wound anything on a 2+, and doesn't even have a bonus to wound or a bonus to its strength, which is kind of insane if you think about it, as most spears in the game have at least a +1 or +2 strength modifier when they're in close combat. And seeing that the Singing Spear got mishandled so badly really doesn't give me much hope for any kind of combat effectiveness that either Farseers or Warlocks might have when we get our index. As far as the increased weapon vulnerability, again, both weapons having the psychic keyword gives them no foreseeable advantage and only makes them vulnerable to enemy special rules. Now, I may be completely wrong, and they may have some hidden section that hasn't been leaked or revealed yet that says psychic weapon rules, and, you know, psychic weapons get a certain bonus against certain targets. Who knows, right? But I don't think so. I think psychic weapons are mostly just going to be for the keyword, for their vulnerabilities, so that they can be targeted by certain stratagems and army special rules. For example, Thousand Suns can make psychic weapons hazardous, and I'm sure other factions will have the ability to do this as well. There's going to be many stratagems that say, you know, target a unit with a psyker or a psyker weapon in it, and there's going to be some sort of negative modifier that's going to be attached to that. So having a psychic weapon, as far as I can tell so far, is only a negative thing, and it is not in any way a bonus. Now, as many of you might have been thinking, listening to this video and me rant about how bad the Witchblade and Singing Spear are in this edition, you might be thinking, well, what about Warlock Conclaves? What will happen to them? Well, unless they get some seriously powerful psychic shooting or buffs, I think the Warlock Conclave as we know it is pretty much dead on arrival for 10th edition. I don't think it's going to be a good unit. Now, I could be completely wrong, and the datasheet could be very strong. but I just don't think so. And I actually have a hunch that GW is going to eliminate the Seer Council completely. I strongly believe that there's a possibility that they're going to make Warlocks just single characters. There's a Warlock on foot and a Warlock Skyrunner, and that is it. Obviously, time will tell on this, but I have a sinking feeling that we won't see the Warlock Conclave in any way in the new index. If they are in the new index and they are their own datasheet, as a bodyguard unit, they're probably going to be redundant and likely overcosted. Again, yes, you could put a Farseer in this unit, but we already have the datasheet for the Farseer, and it seems like Farseers are going to be run best with either Wraithguard, a really tough unit that survives well and can keep the Farseer protected, or even a unit in the backfield, something like Guardians, or if they could even join support weapon batteries. We don't know exactly what keyword support weapon batteries are. In the past, they weren't vehicles, so Farseers maybe can join them. Who knows, right? So they're probably going to be better off with those kind of units and not with a bodyguard of Warlocks that can't really do anything outside of close combat or line of sight. And again, keep in mind that even if they do have a powerful psychic shooting attack, that psychic shooting attack will require line of sight and make the Warlocks vulnerable. There's not really much in the way of battle focus anymore, so keeping a Warlock unit alive that has movement 7 might be a difficult prospect at short ranges. So, and again, truthfully, their damage in combat will also be too weak to be worth considering as a effective battle psyker unit. And again, part of the big allure to Warlock Councils in 9th edition was the fact that not only could they cast psychic powers and support other units in your army, but they were also able to fight themselves. They were actually decent combatants. They were decently tough when in melee. Obviously, just shooting, they died pretty easily like anything else. But once they were stuck in, they had a 4+ invulnerable save. They had 2 wounds apiece. They always wounded everything on basically a 2+, so you may have not been getting the most high AP attacks out of them, but you were getting consistent damage out of them, and they were especially effective against units with a 4+ save or worse. Things like Tyranid Warriors, things like Votan, bikes and stuff like that, they were very effective against just because they could wound them so reliably. And their cost was very cost effective. For every Warlock you had, you could essentially take out a Tyranid Warrior with a Singing Spear if you threw your Singing Spear in and then charged in to follow up. Typically, that would net you 1 kill, which would make up that Warlock's points value. If so facto, it was a very cost-effective unit against a lot of different armies. I think the only real problem that Warlocks had in 9th edition, as far as a council goes, was the fact that they could not be targeted by a lot of psychic powers, because they were not a core unit. But other than that, they were pretty effective, and I remember running several Uthway lists with a couple of Warlock councils and finding them very effective in a lot of situations. And honestly, just based on what I've seen so far, just based on the weapon alone and the Farseer profile, I can honestly say that Warlock Conclaves, unless they have a very good data sheet, which gives them more abilities than just being battle psychers and being good in combat, they're going to really struggle to make it into people's lists. So, in conclusion, again, based on the reveals for Witchblades and Singing Spears, Warlocks and Farseers are looking to be much weaker in combat. Farseers, it's not that big of a deal because they were never really good in combat, but Warlocks, it especially hurts, right? I love using Warlocks as battle psychers, and the fact that now it looks like they're just much worse in general is going to be a hard blow and a hard pill to swallow. The good news is that for all of you guys thinking about, buying new units in 10th edition and what to buy, you don't have to buy that many Warlocks. You only probably need 2 max, so that's 1 box, and that will be a little bit easier on the wallet, which is a good thing, right? I mean, if Seer Councils were great again, I think people would obviously have to spend a lot of money because the kits are really expensive, and even the Warlocks on eBay, the older metal ones, are going for at least $15 a piece now. Which, if you think about it, is kind of expensive for a model that was made in 3rd edition, right? I still have some old Warlocks in my own army, and truthfully, they're so much smaller. The scale of them is ridiculous. They're so much smaller than even Guardians. It's kind of funny. But anyway, I've always liked Seer Councils. I always used to run one, as a matter of fact, in older games. In 5th edition, I loved running them. In 6th edition, I loved running them. even though there's been times where they weren't that effective, I still loved running them as a unit. And I just think that if they are in the index at all, it'll be in a very weak way, because based on what I've seen so far, it doesn't look like they're going to be that good, unfortunately. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. Sorry for a little bit of a sad, depressing video about Warlocks and Farseers combat prowess in 10th edition. Even though, a lot of you may not care because Farseers were never good in combat, it still sucks to see Warlock Seer Councils being, kind of heavily targeted by this in a weird way, because they were never that OP to begin with. But, it is what it is. We just have to roll with the punches. We do have a lot of good stuff for our codex. I will have more videos coming out later this week. I'm probably going to take a little bit of break from content for a while. As far as it pertains to 10th edition, just until there's more Eldar reveals out there, I was thinking of doing a Dark Eldar video and analysis, but I may or may not do that. I'm not a Dark Eldar main. I play Dark Eldar occasionally, but to be honest with you, I haven't had the army in over a year now, so I'm not quite as up to date on them as I would like, but, I might or might not do a video on them. I just don't know yet. Probably I'm erring on the side of not doing a video. I will also be doing a video on a 9th edition tier list just to close the edition out on where our units stand at the end of 9th edition, kind of as a farewell to the codex and to the edition as well before 10th fully comes out in June. And lastly, for those of you wondering where my Escalation League has gone, I've still been playing games in my Escalation League. I just haven't been posting the videos and reports. I've just been very busy outside of, basically playing games. I've basically only been playing the minimum amount that is required to, kind of put content on this channel and, try out some 10th edition stuff, which I have done, and I probably will make a video on that as well. So I've been a little bit swamped as far as real life stuff goes, but I'm hoping to get back to a normal schedule within a couple of weeks. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. And once again, thank you to all my patrons who've supported the channel over the last months. Your contributions have been greatly helping the channel improve, and I really appreciate you helping the community grow as well. If you do want to become a patron or supporter of the channel, I will leave the links in my description for you guys, either through PayPal or through Patreon. Both of them are good, or you could become a YouTube member as well if you prefer that. All of those options are great ways to support the channel in any little way you can. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. Peace out, and see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. See you later.